I used to work in a workplace that put great stock in the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator. At the time, I thought it was silly, and whenever my boss or other people would talk about their personality types, I would say, "Well, I'm a Leo," which I am, and I would do that just to be ornery or a jerk, I think. But since then, I've come around, and I myself put great stock in the usefulness of the Myers-Briggs personality type indicators, not to typecast people or to indicate that it's like their destiny that you'll be this certain way or you are this kind of person, but really to sort of make sense of how they behave and to make sense of how they interact with other people and to a certain extent also to be able to predict how they might respond to something that I do. Um, so I am an ENTP, extroverted, intuitive, thinking perceiver. So you see there's four letters, and every Myers-Briggs type is can be described in these four letters, and in each position, 1, 2, 3, and 4, there can be a possibility of two letters. So the other letters are I, S, F, J. So E versus I, N versus F, T versus F, P versus J. What does that mean? Well, the first one, E versus I, that describes where do you get your energy? Um, are you uh, are you outer directed? Does being around people give you energy? Or at the end of the day, after being around people, do you need to actually be away from people, literally away from all people? And that's where you sort of recharge your batteries. The former is extroverted. The latter is introverted. Now, it doesn't mean extroverts are boors or loud or loutish or jerks, and introverted people aren't shy, meek, and mild. It really indicates literally where you get your energy. Um, so how that might play out in business is, if you've even had a business trip with someone and you're an extrovert and they're an introvert maybe, and at the end of the day you've been meeting, and you want to go out to dinner and talk about it. And maybe you'll collect other people in your traveling party, and you're going to have 4 or 5 people, and it'll be fun. It'll be great. Um, the introvert might say, you know what, you go ahead. I'm going to stay in my hotel room. There's no reason to be offended by that. It's not that they don't like you. Maybe they just need to recharge their battery by literally being away from people. So E versus I in the workplace. The second, N versus F, intuitive versus sensing. This describes how do you take in information in the world. So the first spot is where's your energy come from? The second is how do you take in information? Intuitive or sensing. The intuitive, there's about a third of them in the world, and the other 2/3 are sensing. Um, the N is always recognizing patterns and recognizing very quickly, and um, can sort of sense sort of a gestalt um, all at once. A sensing person takes in information through their 5 senses, literally, um, and typically withholds pattern identification. And so they're very detailed. Their mind quickly goes to the detail of what's going on around them and how it appears. So an N might be a good, it's a synthesis of things. As a writer, often a researcher, um, a sensing person, are often, not always, but often good with their hands, good with manipulation, um, mechanics, craftspeople, artists, some of them, um, people who are sort of manipulating their world. Um, so that's N versus F. Um, T versus F. This one is a big one that comes out in the workplace because this describes how you make your decisions. What are the chief criteria or the first cut criteria that you use? Thinking versus feeling. So um, this isn't about like what kind of how do you come off to people. A thinker is not necessarily a distant, absent-minded professor type, and a feeler is not necessarily a touchy-feely, huggy type. It's how you make your decisions. So a thinker, when they make their decisions, are making decisions impersonally? Does it make sense? Is it rational? Do all the pieces fit together in a sensible way? A feeler, on the other hand, when they make decisions, one of the first things they go to is how are people affected? They're making decisions on a personal basis. Um, how are people affected? What will people's reaction be? And um, it's interesting. One of the calmest, seemingly sort of most absent-minded professor types that I know, um, that you'd think is a thinker, right? They're not. They're a very strong feeler because you can see it when they make decisions. When they make decisions, the first thing they think about is, okay, how are people affected by this? What will the effect of this decision be on other people? Which is not to say that thinkers are unfeeling, and that they don't care about how other people will respond or how it will affect other people. But they don't think about that first necessarily. They think about, well, what would make sense here? What's the reasonable thing to do? So that's thinking versus feeling. And the final one is P versus J. I'm a P again. Now this is another interesting one, especially in the workplace. So just to review, the EI, the first one is where do you get your energy? The NS, intuitive versus sensing, is how do you take in your information? The T versus F, the third spot, is how do you make decisions? And the last one is how do you organize the information and everything writ large? How do you organize the information in your world? P versus J, perceiving versus judging. P is perceiving, J is judging. A judger, and again, this doesn't mean judgmental. It just means someone who is making judgments. Um, J will seek to make decisions and complete the decisions and move on. Um, so as information comes in, they'll decide something, and then they'll typically not want to reopen that decision once it's been made. Um, so in a meeting, for instance, they're listening for to-dos. They'll write them down because those to-dos are all contracts. So the decision was that someone's going to do X. I will do X, and then they'll get them done. Jays are great at working their to-do list, at working any list really. Jays are amazing at this. Um, at hearing in a meeting what are the commitments people are making, and are good at quickly making policy decisions. P, perceiving, which is what I am, on the other hand, tend to want to defer decisions as much as they can until actually they have to decide. They're always looking for more information, and if possible, they'll just not decide, and maybe the decision will be made. Um, these types are they can overcome many of these things, and to any prospective clients out there, I'd like to say I've worked very hard at overcoming some of this, but it's actually the strengths of a P are in moving fast, in creative responses to things, in unusual responses that you wouldn't think of, to a set of information, and in part it's because they don't organize um, too soon. They just keep taking in information, keep taking in. And the truth is that in the business world, and in office teams, and also in sort of in the civic world, doing community things, you really need both. You need P's and you need J's around, and it's because if everyone's a J, just you're going to go in lockstep, and if everyone's a P, very often nothing will get done, and wheels will just spin all the time. What you need are both, and this plays out a lot for me. I work with small groups, and I'll break people into teams, and sometimes I'll accidentally, or the luck of the draw, will have like 3 J's in one small group, and they're done with the task in 2 minutes. But there's often not as much nuance in it as there is if there's a couple of P's in there as well. So the ENTP, that's me, extrovert versus introvert, intuitive versus sensing, thinking versus feeling, perceiving versus judging. Later on, we can talk about more about how this sort of plays out in the workplace and in day-to-day life, but that's Myers-Briggs in a nutshell.